Dawn thinned the dark above the island, and Marcus woke to the scrape of chains and the cry of gulls. Salt and tar pressed into his lungs. He lay on a plank floor behind rough fencing, wrists looped with iron. The crest once sewn to his cloak was gone, cut away like a shed skin. He felt the throb of a bruise at his temple and the steadier ache of hunger. This day would not be bargained with. He steadied his breath and counted the heartbeats between footsteps. They pulled the captives into a line. Links ran from wrist to wrist, then to a chain through the center. A Greek trader with a narrow face and a sea-blue cloak kept pace near the front. Marcus kept his eyes on the ground, on the gritty sand that scuffed up with each step. He measured the street by lintels and thresholds, by a chipped statue of Apollo glimpsed through the alley's end. Heat lifted off the stone early. The day promised no mercy. In a courtyard behind the market, the men were stripped to tunics, splashed with cold water, and rubbed with oil that smelled of olives and old wood. A wax tablet hung from Marcus's neck, a line of neat letters that said what he could lift and how far he had marched. A boy scraped at his stubble with a dull blade and checked his scalp for lice. He set his jaw and let the handling pass through him, a tide he could not turn, only outlast. Buyers drifted in before the sun peaked, men with rings and careful eyes. Fingers pressed Marcus's shoulders. A hand pried his jaw to see his teeth. He tasted iron at the back of his tongue and kept his gaze on the horizon of the wall. Scars drew their attention, the long one across his ribs and the pale crescent at his forearm. He thought of an older hand guiding his first shield drill, of dust in a training yard, and the word for endurance that instructors had barked until it stopped sounding like speech and became a rhythm in the legs. A man from his chain, Delos, stood near enough to brush shoulders. They kept their eyes forward and spoke in the small space between breaths. They named streets from home as if laying stepping stones across a river. Tullus's hand flicked once against Marcus's wrist, a signal made in camps on nights when complaints could cost skin. Marcus sent it back, the barest touch. For a moment his chest loosened, then the moment was gone, and handlers moved them again. Noise thickened in the square. Footsteps, crier's cadence, the clatter of a mallet on wood. The trader in the blue cloak arranged his lots and tested the raised platform. Marcus felt the shift of attention as men and money drew close. The air carried figs, sweat, and the sharp tang of ink from fresh records. He counted breaths, slow and even, and set his shoulders. He had stood to take javelins. He could stand to take eyes. They brought him up with two others, and then left him alone on the boards. Sun hammered his shoulders. The wood underfoot held the day's first heat. He lifted his chin and set his jaw in the way instructors had taught before a shield line met. Faces blurred into a field of eyes, oily shine and lash of color. A hand signaled for him to turn. He turned. A voice called for him to raise his arms. He raised them. Shame flushed and receded like surf, leaving a steadier thing beneath it, a quiet stubbornness that did not need words. Two men did the work of attention. One wore a white toga edged in purple, his hair clipped close, his gaze level. The other had a merchant's rings and a restless hand. Numbers were not shouted so much as laid down with palm, knuckle, nod. Marcus watched the toe-gate man once lift two fingers and then wait as if testing the air. The price crept like a rope drawn hand over hand. The crier's mallet tapped an edge, then fell flat. The platform trembled through his feet when the sound struck. After the sale, the chain came off and a shorter tether replaced it. A steward pressed a leather collar to his neck and crimped a small lead seal with a warm iron, not touching skin, but close enough that heat found the throat. A scribe scratched letters for the new master on a tablet and looked Marcus over as if to see whether the lines fit the shape they tried to name. Bread and water followed, sudden and heavy, and he chewed without tasting. The buyer came up close only once. He spoke through a steward whose Greek moved more smoothly than Marcus's. The tone was measured, the kind used to instruct hired men about fields and accounts. Marcus studied the set of the mouth, the crease at the brow, the way the man stood with feet planted and chin tucked. Neither kindness nor cruelty offered itself first. It was the plain face of ownership, the new fact that would travel with him like a low fever. They brought Tullus forward to a different buyer. Time thinned to a strand as Tullus passed within arm's reach. Marcus lifted his wrists an inch, and Tullus did the same. No words, no sounds that would bring the staff down. Only the brief weight of a look, the stubborn promise that a name would be kept alive inside a skull no matter what else was taken. Then handlers pulled the line apart, and the square swallowed him. Coins changed hands under an awning. The steward counted with the quiet rhythm of a man who had counted long before this day and would count long after. They walked toward the harbor, past shrines scented with cheap incense, past a doorway where a woman leaned and watched without blinking. The sea lay bright and hard as hammered metal. Ships waited with ribs of dark wood and oars stacked like spears. On the deck, the boards smelled of pitch and sun. A coil of rope served as a pillow when they let him sit. The island slid backward, white walls shrinking to chalk marks on darker stone. He found the constellations that used to hang above the march road when he took night watch. Only now they waited in a pale sky and a different wind moved under them. He touched the collar at his throat and counted the slow pulses under his jaw until the count steadied him. Night gathered, and the ship's wake braided itself with starlight. Marcus did not try to gather the whole of what had been lost. The mind could not lift that load. He chose smaller work, a cadence from training, the name of a street, the feel of a shield rim against a palm. He held them as a man holds embers under ash to carry a fire from one camp to the next. Day had taken its price. What remained was his to tend.